Quick recap, what did we do last time? The flood, alright? We did what? We did Cain and Abel, then we did the names. Did we do that last time? Oh, we did that last time, okay. And then we did the flood of Noah. And after the flood of Noah, we hear that Noah has 3 sons, right? Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Ham, Shem, Japheth. Ham, Shem, and Japheth. There's something shady that happens where Ham dishonors Noah, and so Noah curses Ham and says some stuff about, especially he says stuff about Ham's son Canaan. All right, we didn't read that today. It's in the previous chapter. You need to read it if you want to. But Ham gets cursed. That's why pig is called Ham today. That's a terrible joke. Sorry, but never mind. But Ham's son is Canaan. All right. If you know anything about what happens later on, you know that the promised land is the land of Canaan, and the Israelites have to defeat the Canaanites to enter into the land. That's because Canaan becomes so evil, the land of Canaan becomes so evil, and it's all part of the curse. Noah is prophesying that Canaan is going to be wicked. All right, stop me at any time if any part of this confuses you, but Noah has 3 sons. Okay, and Shem on the other hand is blessed. Noah says, you're going to do great, son, and stuff like that. And from Shem come the people of the Shemites. All right, or what we call Semitic people today. The people of Israel come from there. And so it's Shemites, and Japheth we don't really care about so much right now, but maybe we should at some point. Ham's other sons end up being Cush, Egypt, and Put. Right, and you find out that Egypt also becomes an enemy to Israel and stuff like that. So I'm not going too much into that. One of Shem's descendants is this guy, today we read, is this guy named Eber. Now, these are just fun facts for you to know where words came from. I can't draw out any great, deep theological meaning from them, but Eber comes from, one of his descendants is Eber. And that's where you get the word Hebrews or Hebrews. And his descendants become the Hebrews. All right? So, in case you were ever interested in knowing where that came from. But that's about the flood. And after the flood, you get these whole list of genealogies about people and this and that, and you find out what happens. But the next major event, right after the flood, the next major event you hear about is the Tower of Babel. Okay, before the Tower of Babel, you hear of this guy Nimrod, who's come, and a little paragraph about him is written where it says Nimrod became a mighty hunter, and he became this. Basically, what they're trying to say is he became a violent man, and he became a powerful man. And this guy starts establishing cities, and one of the key points of his empire is this place that ends up being called Babylon. All right? Except in Genesis, it's called Shinar. We're still where it's called Shinar. It ends up being called Babylon later. Now that becomes another major enemy of the people of God. Okay? So you're seeing that there's a bunch of enemies here that get listed out. Canaan, Egypt, Babylon. And you don't hear about how they become enemies for years and centuries later. But that's happening already as we speak. And so these people come together at Shinar. And the story of Babel, anybody is hearing that story for the first time? Great. People come together and they say, hey, we've got latest technology. Nobody ever thought of making bricks before. And so they're like, instead of stone, why don't we make bricks? That's going to be amazing. And so they do that. And so they start using bricks and they're like, wow, we can do amazing stuff with this latest tech. And so let's build a tower that reaches the heavens. And we can read that and go, okay, that's just like they just want to build a really tall building. But what they're effectively saying is, let's build a tower that reaches the heavens, which is basically, we're challenging the heavens. We're going to be greater than the heavens. Let's show any spiritual being who is out there that we can do whatever we want by ourselves and we need no help. And I remember there's this quote from some astronaut who went up to space and sent a message back saying, there is no God up here. This is effectively that. The Tower of Babel is challenging the heavens and saying, we are enough and we don't need no God. And so that's what they're doing and they're relying on this tech that they have. They're relying on man's science and efforts. And they're relying on whatever it is that makes them great. And the Bible is clear. It says that they wanted to do this to build a name for ourselves. Right? You read that sentence very clearly. It is them saying, let us build this star so that we can build a name for ourselves. And I want you to remember that sentence because we'll come back to it in a bit. But what seems to be happening here is that it's clear that ambition, blind ambition, ambition that wants to glorify the self is majorly offensive to God. When we stop and say, hey, I want to build a name for myself, we're offending God. We're challenging the heavens. We're saying, I want to exalt myself. And the more you may say, oh, not as much as God, just a little bit. There is no stopping point, which is God's point. God says, if these guys start building this tower, there is no end to what they would want to do. They will keep wanting to do more. And they'll keep wanting to try exalting themselves over God, which is a horrifying thing to do. And so every time we want to exalt ourselves for our name's sake, and we say, my kingdom come, we're one step closer, and there is no stopping point. We'll just keep wanting to go above and above and above. And it's a dangerous thing to want to do that. To desire attention for ourselves, to desire fame for ourselves, to desire glory for ourselves. And we can say, oh, I don't want to be worshipped. And yet when we want attention for ourselves and the work that we do, that's what we seek. Right? It's a dangerous game. Satan wanted to exalt himself above God. And that was his biggest fall. Jesus said, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but to lose his soul? And here, these guys who are building the tower want to gain the whole world at the cost of their souls. Right? Now, when you think tower, don't think about the Burj Khalifa. Right? What you need to think about is this thing called ziggurat. Right? If you played video games, you may have come across this, but otherwise I'm not sure if you have. A ziggurat it looks like, may not be the best at drawing, sorry. At some point I should stop, no? How do I stop this? Like that, I guess? Correct, okay. Does that make sense? Except it's not a direct pyramid. It's slabs on each other. So these are steps and there's steps here. Very long what? Exactly. This is a religious structure. What they're trying to build is a way to build religion, and it's a religious structure where there probably would have been sacrifices at the top. It's a spiritual thing. It's going to have, most of these ziggurats had horoscopy symbols at the top, the signs of the stars and idols and things like that. And so effectively what they're doing is they are trying to set up a god, trying to challenge the God of the heavens, which is a big no-no. And so there's no telling where it would end. And so what God does is he comes down and he confuses their languages, and he gives them all different languages, and they are all scattered across the world. Right? And so they go from the land of Babylon to, I don't know where, but many, many different places. Now, thousands of years later, the reversal of what happens here happens. Instead of nations being scattered, people from different nations are brought together. And instead of languages being separate, everyone is made to understand each other's language. And at Pentecost, the Holy Spirit comes, and the reversal of the Tower of Babel happens. The reversal of Babylon happens. Instead of people trying to make a name for themselves and trying to build a tower up to the heavens, God himself comes down to the earth, into the hearts of men and women. And people are able to understand each other. It's a complete reversal of the Tower of Babel. Right, so just an interesting story. This is a book I refer to. It's called Unlocking the Bible. This is where I get a lot of my notes from. But what I want to tell you now is, it's a theory. Many language scholars do not agree with this theory. I just find it fascinating. And so if you're interested, please, any linguistic experts here by any chance? Scam expert. Anyone who knows Chinese here? Okay. So a bunch of these people who are at Babel, what ends up happening is they scatter and they go to the east and they end up becoming the people of China, is the theory, right? And the Chinese language, if you've seen it, it's not scribbles, it's pictorial. It's pictures of things, all right? And here's what this theory is. This, what I'm drawing, is the Chinese word for create, okay? It looks something like that. Bigger? Something you can see? Yeah? Okay, so just remember, this is the word for create. All right? Create just looks like a bunch of symbols, but the word is formed by joining other symbols. Okay? And so the word for create is formed by joining the words mud, life, and walking. It's the story of somebody made from life given to somebody made from mud who ends up walking. That's the word for create in Chinese. Right? Are you all getting something here? The word for devil, apparently I don't want to draw it because that's absolutely terrible. The word for devil is formed from the words son or a man in a garden and something secret. The word for devil is somebody secret hiding in a garden from a man. The word for tempter is two trees and a covering. And the word for boat is a container. It's formed by the words container, 8, and people. So a container that holds 8 people. Noah and his family. Right? Now, this part is true, that these words are formed like that. Whether they are directly derived from Genesis, that's what scholars are very negative about. I honestly don't care, but it just seems fascinating, right? That you can construct Genesis from the Chinese language, from a pictorial language, and that's just cool. Okay, anyway, we finished Noah and the flood, we finished Babel, and there's two, right from the start, right from Adam's story, there's two themes that keep going on, right? One is God's justice and the other is God's mercy. And you see it over and over again, right in the garden. How does God's justice play out? What does justice look? They got banished from the garden, right? Adam and Eve got banished from the garden because they sinned. That's the justice part. The mercy part is God had to kill an animal to provide a covering for them. Cain and Abel, God leashes out justice on Cain and says, you will be a wanderer forever. But he also gives mercy to Cain and says, here's a mark for you so that no one will kill you. And then we have in the flood is justice because of how terrible people have become. And yet God prophesies through Enoch and his son Methuselah saying, and giving Methuselah a long life, saying, only when Methuselah dies, the flood will come. And so there's these themes of justice and mercy throughout the Bible until they both meet at the cross. And the cross is where God's justice and wrath is poured out for the sins of all the world, so that the rest of us can have mercy. But in Genesis, you see them as two separate things going on and on until they meet at the cross. And after Babel, nations are formed. Each nation ends up taking a national god or so. And from here on, you'll start hearing about all these false idols. You start hearing about this god called Baal. Then there's Isis. Then there's Ashtaroth. You hear about Dagon later on. You hear about Molech later on. You hear about all these weird names of gods. And maybe we'll do a study of them one day, who knows. But reality is what? Yahweh is the God of gods. Right? Yahweh is the God above all. And so we have this reality which is Yahweh is the God of the universe. Correct? No other God compares. He is creator of all. He is God over all. He is ruler over all. He is he's the only actual God to exist. He is the God of the universe. And that's an offensive thing to say for many people who worship any other God. But that is truth. Yahweh is God above all, God of the entire universe. And yet there's an other side to this from this point on this story. that the God of the entire universe ends up being the God of the Jews. He ends up being the God of the Jews specifically. Suddenly there's this group of people who are called the Jews. They're not called the Jews yet, but who claim that the creator of everything has a unique, special relationship to them. Now, to say Yahweh is the only God of the universe is offensive enough. But now to say that God has favorites, that he picks one group of people, is scandalous. It's super offensive. I've had arguments with family members about it, saying God can't be God if he has favorites. It makes us feel uncomfortable that he would pick he would pick just one person, and we're not part of that people group. Right? We're not direct descendants of Abraham. And not just with people group, God, this Yahweh, he chooses to identify himself with one family. 3 people in that family, a grandfather, a father, and a son. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And from that point, always God is referred to as the God of these 3 people. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God chooses to identify himself with 3 people. And it seems scandalous. Right? I remember when Prema and I used to go for certain events, people would come to her and say, hey, you're Nestin's wife, right? And she would feel offended about that. And there was this one time when somebody came to her and came to me and said, hey, you're Prema's husband, right? And she was so joyful about it that I was identified as being associated with her. Right? And we take offense that we are not the known person. But here's God saying, you will know me as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not anybody else. And so he's called that through the Bible, and it seems to show favoritism. And people can be offended by it. Why would he pick just one family? And yet the time given to just this one family in Genesis is massive. Like we read Genesis 11 today. That's 11 chapters. From 12 till 40 plus chapters, it's about this one family. Right? Genesis 1 to 11, by the way, is thousands and thousands of years. Genesis 12 onwards is barely like 200 years. And yet, so much time is dedicated to that family rather than the rest of the story. And it seems really unfair. But there's no reason for it except that God chooses them. Yeah, they're the line of Seth. Yes, they're the line of Shem. Yes, they're the line of Eber. But apart from that, Abram or Abraham, whatever you want to call him, is just chosen because God chooses him to fulfill his plans and purposes, to carry out his act of redemption. God chooses this guy. And we can say, oh no, I need my problems solved. Why is God solving only Abraham's problems? But the Bible, and we need to remember this, the Bible is not God's answer to our problem. We are the problem. The Bible is God's answer to God's problem, which is, what do you do with the people who refuse to love you and obey you no matter what you do for them? What do you do with the people who you sacrifice so much for, who you give the prophecy of somebody coming for, and yet they refuse to just do the bare minimum and stop hurting you? And that's God's problem. Because he still, and destroying them all is not a solution, because he wants a family. Like somebody said, God had a son, and he loved him so much that he decided to have a larger family. Prema hint. But, right, destroying people is not the solution for God. He wants a family, and so he chooses the Jews to save the rest of humanity. And he chooses Abraham. Yes, he chooses the Jews for some reason. The question is, why couldn't he choose an Indian to save India, and a Chinese person to save China, and a British person to save UK, and an Australian person to save Australia, whatever? He could do that. But remember, what I said is, God's problem is that he wants a family that will love him. Right? Let's say Beth bakes the most amazing cake for us. All right? Now, I have 2 options. Either I come, cut the cake in equal parts, and come to you one by one and distribute them to you, or I ask, hey, does anybody want to volunteer in distributing it? And Roshan will raise his hand, and I'll give Roshan the cake. Now Roshan has two choices. Either eat the cake for himself and come back to me and say, I did what you asked me to do, or maybe take a bigger piece for himself, or he can cut it in equal parts and do what I wanted him to do, which is give everybody an equal. I can ask each one of you to do that. And when I ask you to do that, there may be fights. I mean, we're adults hopefully, but if we were younger, there may be fights that Rini got a bigger piece than me. How could she do that? How could she take the bigger piece? I wanted that piece. Now, this option, the second option, causes more violence among us, yes, but it's the only way to build a family. It's the only way for us to learn how to share and love each other. The first option of me distributing the cake equally to among all of y'all does not build a family. It ensures fairness, yes, but it does not teach us how to love, or how to be kind to each other, how to love each other and care for each other. It's about distributing, like when I say cake among us, don't think about us, think about little children. You're distributing chocolates to little children, and you give a 5-year-old the whole bag of chocolates and say, give it to the rest of the class. Very likely he's not going to do that. But if he does that, he's learning sharing, he's learning kindness, he's learning love. Right? And so that's what God wants. He wants to build a family, not sharing just God. Because here, what's happening is God says, Abraham, I will bless you so that other nations will be blessed through you. Right? I will bless you so that other nations will be blessed through you. Because when God blesses anyone, it is always so that others may be blessed through it. The blessing does not, never should stop with you. It should not stop with you. In fact, Israel, when the nation of Israel is formed, God looks at them as a kingdom of priests. And Israel is at the center of the world, so that the surrounding nations can see the way Israel lives and know what a good God they serve. And so that they can also come in and know about this good God. They can get the chocolate cake piece if Israel had just shared it with them. Right? That's what's happening here. The blessing is never meant to stop with you. Why do you think the Great Commission is such an important commandment? Because you have received the blessing and it cannot stop with you. It has to go on. That was God's plan always. That you would be the member of the family to start distributing love. In Israel, there's 2 lakes, there's 2 seas. There's the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. The Dead Sea, I'm sure many of you all would have heard of it, full of salt. You can float there because the salt content is so high. And nothing grows in it. There's no life in it. It's the Dead Sea. The Sea of Galilee is full of life. It's got fish, it's got weeds, it's got plants, it's got a lot of stuff that you can fish in. And the reason is that the Sea of Galilee has an inflow of water, and it also has an outflow that goes further on. The Dead Sea only has an inflow, it has no outflow. And because the Dead Sea will not pass on the water, it is dead. It dies. And so when the blessing comes to you, and you choose to keep it for yourself and hide it, like Jesus said, nobody hides a lamp under a bushel. But if you choose to do that, you start dying. You start becoming the Dead Sea. We get to pass on the blessing. We get to overflow with the blessing onto others. And God says to Abraham, remember what I told you to remember about the Tower of Babel? What was it? That why did they want to build the Tower of Babel? So that they can make a name for themselves. So here are the people of Babel saying, we will make a name for ourselves. We will make our name great. And here God comes to this one dude, Abraham, and says, I will make your name great. And Abraham has 0 qualifications, 0 tech. And God comes and says, hey, I just choose you and I will make your name great. You will be blessed, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed. And that means the blessing is given to Abraham so that it can continue. And so he chooses them. He talks to them as special friends. They have no natural claim to God. Like, God is the one who initiates the relationship with them freely. Now, if you're thinking any of this is unfair, remember, God has chosen to initiate the relationship with you freely. You get the blessing of Abraham and so much more. You get the revelation of Christ and so much more. In fact, Jesus says, Abraham looked forward to the day of my coming. We have the day of his coming. We already have him. And so God initiates the relationship. These men have no moral claim on God, Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. All of them are shady fellows. They do some crazy stuff. We'll get into that maybe next week. They're all flawed. But the thing they have is faith. The book of Hebrews tells us they had faith. And there's a counter to all these three men. Abraham had faith, and the counter to Abraham is Lot, who chose the way of the flesh. Then his son Isaac, and the counter to him is Ishmael. And then there's his son Jacob, and the counter to him is Esau. Right? Abraham had faith when he left an impressive city to go live in a tent, because God says, hey, listen, I'm going to call you blessed, and the world is going to call you blessed, and you're going to be a super blessed guy. And Abraham's probably thinking, wow, this is amazing, this is too good. And then God says, by the way, you have to leave a super comfortable and rich city and live in a tent for the rest of your life. Oh, and you're 80 years old. Now, if God came to you at 80 and said, get out of your house and live in a slum, would you do it? And he says, oh, you're going to be super blessed. And Abraham shows faith and he does it. He goes ahead and does it. He had faith when God told him he would have a son when his wife was 90 years old. You know, last week when we did that genealogy and we saw one of the people's names meant miserable, and Bethany felt so bad for him, saying, how could they name their son miserable? Here, God comes with a promise, and they find it so ridiculous that they'll have a son at 90 that they name their son a joke. Isaac means a joke. Imagine growing up with that name, like your name meaning joke. And that's what happens to Isaac, fun guy. But Abraham also tries in his own effort to have a child. He gets a slave girl and sleeps with her. It was Sarah's idea, apparently. I'm sure it was. I mean, the Bible says it was Sarah's idea, but so I can't refute that. But yeah, and so we have Ishmael, who's a child of the flesh, and till today you will find that the children of Isaac and the children of Ishmael are at war. Isaac had faith when he was prepared to be sacrificed by Abraham on the altar. Abraham had faith believing that Isaac would be raised up from the dead. Right? That's the reason Abraham agrees to this whole operation, saying, even like Abraham remembers, God has promised me a son, and God has said that through this son I will have many children. And so even if I kill him, he'll be raised from the dead, which is an amazing level of faith to have, considering that had never happened before. Nobody had been raised from the dead before. And Abraham believes. And Isaac's faith is that he allowed Abraham to kill him. Abraham is like 100 years old, and Isaac is not 12 years old. Isaac is 30 plus years old. He's a full-grown man, built because he's working in fields. He's got muscles from all different parts of his body. And he could have just punched Abraham in the face and run away. But he chooses to let himself be sacrificed. Jacob had faith. At first, no, he was very manipulative. He manipulates his father. But God had to have a major talk with him. And from then on, Jacob changes. But with all their weaknesses, these three men shine out as examples of faith. In contrast, we see Lot. The contrast to Abraham being Lot was materialistic. Abraham chose to live in the tent, and Lot chose the most fertile place to live in. And he ended up in trouble there because Sodom and Gomorrah came and whooped him. Esau was also a man of flesh. He went after instant gratification. He said, Jacob, give me some soup and you can have whatever you want. Like, that's just ridiculous, in my opinion. And so throughout these stories, what you have is, are you a person of faith or are you a person of the flesh? Will you listen to what God wants you to do, even if that means go live in a tent at the age of 75? Or will you be a man or woman of the flesh, seeking prosperity and a name for yourself, even if that's not what God wants? Because in the former, God says, I will make your name great. And the irony is, you're not seeking greatness in the first part. And yet God will say, you will be known as my people. But in the second, he comes and confuses the language, scatters the people, and the blessing falls. And so through you have that option of faith or flesh. And in the case of faith, you get the blessing. But at the same time, the blessing cannot be restricted to you. It has to spread. You have to be the vessel that overflows into others. Right? And when I say vessel, remember, you still get to keep the blessing. When I say vessel, don't think of yourself as a pipeline. It's not that the blessing comes in you and goes out. It's overflowing from you. And if it doesn't, we end up like the Dead Sea. Hey there, thank you so much for watching this video, and we hope you were blessed by it. It would mean so much to us if you liked this video and subscribe to our channel, and also share this link with your friends. God bless you.